Okay, great. I'm going to hit record here and then, perfect. Amanda, I'm going to make you the host. And just make sure, Amanda, that if it doesn't say recording anymore, that you hit record at the bottom so that we make sure it gets recorded to the cloud.
Gotcha.
Perfect. You're the host now. And you should see a button to start in 1 minute. And thank you both so much.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for another session of Links presented by Chainalysis. I'm Amanda Wick, and I'm the Chief of Legal Affairs here at Chainalysis, Inc. I'm excited to be joined today by Valerie, or Val Sapanik, the Director of the Strategic Hub for Innovation and Financial Technology, or FinHub, within the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC. Let me tell you a bit about Val. Before her appointment as the Director of FinHub, she was the Senior Advisor for Digital Assets and Innovation and an Associate Director in the SEC's Division of Corporate Finance. She also served as Assistant Director in the SEC Division of the Enforcement Cyber Unit. Val served as a Special Assistant United States Attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York. She clerked for federal judges on the United States District Court for the District of Columbia and the United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. And prior to clerking, she practiced patent law. She received her Juris Doctor degree from Georgetown University and her Bachelor of Science degree in Engineering from the University of Pennsylvania. And if that's not all impressive enough, she's one of the few people in the government, especially in crypto, who you can just say the one name Val and everybody knows exactly who you're talking about. Recently, the SEC announced that FinHub became a standalone office with Val, its first director, reporting directly to the SEC chairman. So we are incredibly excited to have you. I'm looking forward to your insights and our discussion today. We want to introduce ourselves to you if you don't know us, though. Chainalysis is the blockchain analysis company. We provide data, software, services, and research to government agencies, exchanges, financial institutions, and insurance and cybersecurity companies in over 50 countries. Our data platform powers investigation, compliance, and risk management tools that have been used to solve some of the world's most high-profile cyber criminal cases and grow consumer access to cryptocurrency safely. So a couple of housekeeping matters. Just want to let folks know we will have some time for question and answers at the end. But please don't ask about any open or pending cases. Val won't be able to answer those, but you can ask your questions throughout and we'll just take them at the end. But very excited to just jump right in. Okay, Val, let's start. Can you just briefly describe FinHub for those who are unfamiliar?
Sure, and I just want to say I'm really happy to be here. It's going to be such a pleasure to chat with you and your audience here today. So thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm the director of the SEC's new office of FinHub. FinHub has been around for a while in a different iteration. Essentially, it was set up in October of 2018 to really consolidate work that had been going on across the divisions and offices at the Commission in the areas of financial technology, including distributed ledger technology, digital assets, peer-to-peer lending, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and robo-advising, all those areas. There was work going on at the Commission for some time, but in October 2018, that was consolidated within the FinHub. And FinHub really set up within the Division of Corporation Finance first, but it's always meant to be a coordinating presence throughout all the divisions and offices. So recently we were elevated to an office status, directly reporting to the chairman. And I think what that does is really signal the commitment that the Commission has to the office and to innovation, and signals that we're going to be permanent structure within the SEC, reporting directly to the top, so that as things happen, we can be more agile, more limber in terms of dealing with developments as they're happening in real time. The FinHub really is a coordinating office to coordinate all the intake of questions and public input and public engagement around these areas of financial innovation. But it's also meant to kind of build our own expertise, spread that throughout the agency into all the work we do, whether it's enforcement work or policy work, rulemaking, just dealing with the market developments as they're happening, making sure that we're being as proactive as possible and that we're providing a very, kind of streamlined way for people to come in and talk to the commission and commission staff and get their views heard. And so that said, I mean, that's kind of an overview of the office. I will say anything that we talk about today obviously are my own views and not necessarily those of the commission or any other commission staff or commissioners, but hopefully we can continue with that kind of ground rule.
Oh, of course. You mentioned that the new role of it being a standalone office kind of will help you kind of coordinate across divisions. Can you talk a little specifically about what your relationship is with the enforcement division? Maybe explain that a bit. I think as a former prosecutor, that's probably where I encountered SEC the most. And it would help to kind of know now that you're a standalone, what does that relationship look like?
Sure. So we represent and support all the divisions and offices across the commission. As I mentioned, we're kind of a flat hub and spoke structure. So the central part of FinHub, which is now under my direction, will continue to coordinate and have a little bit more dedicated resources toward the administrative functions. But the way we're set up is to have a delegate from each office and division that works within FinHub to kind of assimilate what's going on there and then spread it out to their working divisions. And so we have the technical expertise that we've built a pretty deep bench of here, but we also have to draw upon the kind of operating divisions of the commission and tap into what they're doing. People who are dealing with custody issues across the board, or the people that are dealing with investment advisors. They have expertise that we have to blend in with the technical expertise that we're building in order to actually, integrate all this work into the work of the commission. So, like I say, the delegates are a crucial part, and for people from looking from the outside in, I don't think the experience will change much. You're going to see the same faces in FinHub and the same kind of experts you've been dealing with for the past couple of years continuing in our work, but we have kind of more permanency and more dedicated resources. And I think it'll enable us to continue our leadership role in a lot of these areas. Now with the Division of Enforcement, again, it is represented within FinHub, but we do recognize that we want to be a welcoming kind of force for people to come in and talk with us without kind of fearing that there's someone from enforcement that's looking over our shoulders. We don't want to scare people away. Obviously, we want to be welcoming. So generally speaking, at many of our meetings, there won't be an enforcement person there. Now that said, we are one agency. So if we do learn in the course of our work that there's been a violation, it's always a facts and circumstances kind of evaluation. But if there has been a violation and if there is some risk of investor harm or market harm, we're one agency, so that information may be passed along. We're not constrained. We can't be constrained from passing along information we learn in the course of our work that may result in investor harm or ongoing harm. So enforcement, from time to time, may be brought in. I don't think that's the typical way that we work. We want to encourage people to come talk to us before they undertake activities. So we always we've been putting the message out there and want to continue putting that message out there that we're there as a resource to innovators. And we encourage them to come talk to us as early as possible and to consult with legal expertise in the securities area. We can't give legal advice, but we give a lot of guidance. We like to sit down with the entire team on a project, from the entrepreneurs, the developers, the engineers, the lawyers, the advisors. We want to sit down with the whole team and invite you to do that so that we can kind of go through our questions and tease out what might be, issues for people to think about. Or in certain cases, there could be, we could recommend that you talk to a sibling regulator like the CFTC or the FinCEN and we can make a handoff to the appropriate people there. So again, our mission within FinHub is to encourage responsible innovation. But what I mean by that is we take a technology neutral approach. We want to encourage beneficial innovations. We don't think that means reducing investor protection or market protection or increasing risk of investor harm. We think that there are appropriate guide rails that we can help people stay within as they innovate and to avoid any regulatory pitfalls.
Now, I think that's a really good thing that I kind of want to touch on, that concept of responsible innovation, because at least right now it seems that, SEC, CFTC Lab, FinCEN Innovation Hours, it seems like a lot of the regulators are really trying to kind of have those conversations to say, hey, we really don't want to stymie the industry. But then there is this kind of inclination on the industry's part to be like, well, we're moving too fast for that, or we want to, be unfettered and free. And that seems to be kind of like the tension that you see a lot there. I guess, you mentioned kind of referring things to other agencies. Do you see opportunities for interagency cooperation there, or collaboration with industry, or do you see room for improvement there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's certainly been a lot of collaboration with the various innovation hubs or innovation labs. So, over the past at least few years that I've been involved working in the digital asset space, there's been constant and very rich communication going on between us, the CFTC, FinCEN, Treasury, OCC, FDIC, the whole alphabet soup of regulatory agencies and policymakers. And I see that continuing. I think it's been really beneficial on our side to make sure that we're all coordinated, that we're not taking disparate approaches, that we're on the same page in terms of from the USG side. Everybody kind of recognizes that the US has a regulatory kind of landscape to navigate in financial industry. There are various regulators and policymakers that touch upon this area. They have overlapping jurisdiction, sometimes concurrent jurisdiction. And if us working together can help guide people through that landscape, I think that benefits us and benefits the folks that are trying to innovate in a compliant way. So I do see this continuing. We have bilateral meetups with our sibling regulators. We have multilateral kind of groups that work together, working groups that work on various issues. As you'll probably note, for example, the PWG put out a statement, I think right around the holiday, dealing with stablecoins. And I think that was a good example of the various regulators and policymakers trying to come together in this space to say to the industry, here is the regulatory landscape. These are the things you probably need to be thinking about if you're going to go down the route of trying to implement a large scale or significant stablecoin arrangement. And these are the various things that you should take into consideration. That represents kind of our initial view, a bunch of regulators and policymakers around, the concept of, for example, a global stablecoin arrangement. And we hope provides some kind of, framework or guidance or guidelines for people reading it. That's just one example. So we do communicate through these groups with each other and with the public.
Yeah, it's certainly a difference. It seems like a much more collaborative strategy. I know at DOJ, we didn't field letters from the public saying, if I do these actions, would it be a crime, right? So it's kind of a huge thing, I think, that innovators kind of take for granted, that all these regulators are offering this chance to, hey, before you do something, before you drive off a cliff, just come talk to us about it. So hopefully people will take advantage of that. You mentioned something interesting about the regulatory landscape, and I know everybody's really curious. There was a lot of stuff going on during the holidays, right before the new year. In terms of 2021, can you talk about anything you see in terms of regulation or things that might be coming up in the new year?
Sure. I think there was a series of activity and actions that went out right at the end of last year Folks probably on this call are aware of some of them. I'll point out something, that I think happened throughout the commission. The commission put out a statement in December 2020 regarding the custody of digital asset securities by special purpose broker-dealers. And just a little bit of history, I think, into this statement might illustrate how a journey happens between a regulator and innovators. So folks were coming in, entities that wanted to engage in broker-dealer type activity with digital assets. And of course, this raises the implications of the federal securities laws if those digital assets are in fact securities. And we've gone through the test. Folks are aware of the Howey test. There's other tests to see if something is a security, but the main point is if something is a security, then all the federal securities laws apply. So folks came in to talk to us about the implications of that, and hearing what was going on, the kinds of discussions. Our Division of Trading and Markets, along with FINRA staff, put together a statement in 2019 talking about what issues are raised by that type of activity. And those had to do with the safety of customer assets, the customer protection rules, net capital, how you would account for digital asset securities, how you would safely custody them for clients and work with them. So putting out a letter saying these are the various considerations that we're all thinking about, and encouraging a continuing dialogue, because it was a very productive dialogue happening between the industry groups and staff. So we heard after the statement, staff heard that there were some issues around, processing trades by an ATS using, kind of a 4-step process. And so the industry said, we think it would be more efficient and also very safe to undertake things using a 3-step process, a different process. And so the staff, hearing that, put out a no action letter subsequently to FINRA saying it would be okay in these circumstances for these entities to facilitate transactions in this way. And so with the staff. So I think, that showed an evolution of thinking and a response to what we were hearing in the public. We heard more, and we've been thinking a lot about the various risks that occur with custody. And so the commission actually put out in December a statement that I think accomplishes 3 things. The first is it's a statement about encouraging innovation around the customer protection rule by broker-dealers or entities that want to engage in broker-dealer type activity. It sets forth a number of conditions that would make custody of digital asset securities safer in terms of protecting a broker-dealer's customers, counterparties, the assets themselves, and reducing risks, mitigating risks. What it does also is give a commission level no action position. So for 5 years, if broker-dealers want to interact with digital asset securities, if they do so pursuant to the conditions in that statement, there won't be an enforcement action brought against them under the customer protection rule provision talked about in that letter. And then the third is it's really a request for comment. So it's did the commission get this right? And what it does is invite the public to come in and tell us, either it should be expanded this way, or you should look at it differently, or you looked at it the wrong way. This 5-year kind of time frame gives the public time to innovate around the customer protection rule and how they will satisfy the various requirements in the customer protection rule with respect to the custody of digital asset securities. It also gives the commission time to process what's going on, to see what operational models are being implemented. As it mentions under the statement, FINRA and the SEC exam staffs will have the authority to come in and do inspections and examinations. And this will inform us how people are actually implementing kind of the principles behind the statement. And so I think it represents the culmination so far of a lot of great back and forth with industry participants and staff facilitated through the FinHub. And so that's just one example. And I think looking toward the future, we're going to have entities coming in and saying, well, okay, how can we implement the conditions of this letter? What are our operating models going to look like? How are we dealing with the staff? If there are open questions, working with the staff and with FINRA to kind of work through those issues. So I think 2021 is going to bring a lot more, questions around actual implementation under some of the guidance that has come out.
Well, let me just say 5 years seems like a very long time in crypto. So much happens so quickly. I mean, in terms of like if something were to change tomorrow mechanically, like could the SEC come back and say, oh, there's been this massive technological shift or this massive innovation? Could that 5 years be shortened? I mean, obviously, probably not holding against people what had happened in the past, but could they come back and change that 5 years?
That's a great question. And it's funny that you should say 5 years is so long in the crypto space. It's kind of it's like a time warp with crypto, because you think about, the modern financial industry and how long it's really taken to get the pipes and the plumbing in place and all the protections that we have around lessons that we learned, for example, in the financial crisis, and around really making the safety and soundness of our financial markets better, and also protecting investors in the markets against various fraudulent activities. But in the crypto sphere, yes, things seem to move quickly, and I think probably because a lot of the innovation is happening by folks who aren't coming from the traditional sector. They're coming from they're just coming from tech firms, or they're coming from firms who may not have been in the financial industry, but may have a great new idea about how to change things. And so to them, or to a lot of people, it seems like things move incredibly slowly. But I think, first of all, regulators aren't the ones innovating. So we're always kind of, in a certain way, reacting to what the innovations are. And we're trying not to regulate in a way that has picking winners and losers in technology, or a certain technology and pushing that. We're trying to be technology neutral to allow the innovation to happen, so that there's more than one solution. There's more than one business model. We want to encourage a lot of that kind of activity to take place. And it's not our role to direct how that takes place. In as long as it's compliant in terms of, what is the winning technology, if there is one. So, we think that the way this really will roll out in terms of integrating into the financial sector, where you're dealing with people's assets and you're dealing with people's retirement funds, it is going to happen incrementally. It is going to happen in more of a incremental fashion, where we can be assured that the protections that we have in place remain in place. So when you look at the financial industry, anytime someone is managing assets or trading your money or holding your assets for you, it's highly regulated activity, and it is for a purpose. You don't want people's assets flying out the door. And look what happened in the financial crisis. We don't want that repeated. And people rely, you want to make sure that when people retire, they have their money that they've worked hard for their entire life to enjoy for the rest of their life. So I think, that's all behind what the SEC is about, investor protection. And we just want to make sure that, yes, we want to encourage things that are going to make investors have a more seamless experience, a better experience, that they're going to be more interested and have more options. But also that they're not going to lose their money through operational failure, cybersecurity issues, or fraud.
Yeah, it's interesting, going back to your point where you said that people think that the regulation and the statutory passage here is so slow. And I want to say, you understand, like, the Bank Secrecy Act in the 70s wasn't even enacted for 10 years. And then it took 30 years before the Patriot Act came. And then it took So like, if you're comparing fiat to crypto, some would say that crypto regulation and, the process in place is actually going pretty quickly comparatively, given how short a time we've had crypto and given how long we had cash. So there's an argument to be made there. I will say one of the things that I think, in terms of priorities for 2021, you mentioned the statement regarding the broker dealers, some of the no action letters, the PWG statement. How are you guys going to top that? What will your priorities be for next year in terms of, setting aside from regulation, just, things that you're trying to kind of accomplish or achieve at FinHub?
Also a great question. As we move forward, I think we've put the kind of the foundation in place now for a lot of good interaction with the industry, with academia, with other regulators, with international counterparts. So we want those bridges to be built and continue to be built. We want people to continue to come in to us with their ideas, with their pain points. We are listening. We can't always react as quickly. We can't always do exactly what someone would think that we should do. I mean, we have many considerations, so they may not see the big picture, or maybe maybe they can help us see things that we can't see because of our position, where we are. So I think what I see is more bridge building with the industry, with academia, with our fellow regulators and our international counterparts. We're on a number of international work streams as well, looking at things not only in the digital asset space, but in SupTech and RegTech. We are very interested in the DeFi space, understanding, we can talk a little bit more about that, but as people are experimenting with new forms of structures and governance structures and instruments and systems, we'd like to be there too, to kind of remind people, this is an experimental area. There are things that we need to think about in terms of market protection and investor protection. And we don't want to stifle the kind of experimentation that's going on, but we want to make sure that, we have protections built in so it doesn't result in, disaster to retail or the loss of investor funds.
Yeah, you talked a moment about DeFi. I'm sure that's going to be a question that we're going to get. It's coming up everywhere. I know it's an issue creating challenges for everyone. And I get that while regulating DeFi may fall outside of the SEC's purview, I imagine some DeFi projects will touch on securities laws. Are there any DeFi projects that are on your radar for 2021?
So I can't talk about any particular projects, but we certainly want to, I think, take a deep dive into this space. We'd invite people to come in and talk to us who are heavily involved in the DeFi space, who want to give us their perspectives or how they look at things. We are going to be looking at what kind of structures are there. As you probably know, DeFi really, it seems to be an attempt to build financial services and activities around, when I use the word decentralized, I'm really referring to, the base layer being probably something like Ethereum, an open source protocol. People are contributing and they're building applications on top of that that's plugging into that layer's computational layer. But they could be providing what looks like services we're used to seeing, lending, exchange, trading, insurance, derivatives. To provide that in a different type of way. So, that there's a minimalization of trust in kind of known central parties, that the trust is really shifted to the technology, and that, the crypto economics set up incentive structures that, that govern the system and that, lead the people using the system into directions. So, it's really fascinating stuff. I would love to see, I've always talked about how you can really do a lot with technology. And one thing you can do is to build kind of protections into the code. And we've seen a lot of that. We've seen people building in protections into code that deal with restrictions or whitelisting to make sure that, investors are getting in or having certain disclosures to them before they invest. We've seen a lot of work in that area and a lot of progress that I've it's really great. And I think we can also see in the DeFi space progress in terms of building in incentives within the crypto economic framework to disincentivize fraud and to incentivize good governance. And so, these are complicated structures, and I think, there is probably, people who want to really move quickly in this area because it's exciting, and it's coding, and there's no real limit from a theoretical standpoint of what you can achieve. But I think it would behoove everyone to think about, what happened with the hype in the ICO market. It really wasn't good for the industry as a whole. They had to overcome, the stigma of a lot of fraud happening. And I think if you take the lessons of 2016 and 2017 and put them into this DeFi space now, I would just encourage the innovators in this space to take it upon themselves to make sure that people understand what's happening, and to make sure that they're testing each other's codes, to make sure that there aren't bad coding, bad implementations, or cybersecurity risks that really aren't being vetted, and those kinds of vulnerabilities, as well as kind of full disclosure of what's happening, so that if people are getting into the space, they're going in with eyes open into what these products and services are.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what we were talking about, responsible innovation. And, now having been on the gov side and now being on the private sector side, there is this kind of tension of, you always wonder, are people asking the questions from the beginning? Well, how do we prevent this horrible problem that could happen? How do we prevent fraud? Or how do we prevent, millions or billions of dollars immediately being moved into an unhosted wallet belonging to a sanctioned country, right? Like, I feel like if those questions, if you can't answer those to a regulator, I feel like that's a problem that it's not always clear to me that the industry is kind of answering. And that seems to be kind of the tension sometimes, right? At a fundamental layer, it seems like regulators, especially my parents are financial planners, right? And the regulation is there to protect them, but also their customers, right? And I grew up hearing about SEC and FINRA and all of this stuff. That discussion of, are innovators asking the tough questions to be able to say that they are responsibly innovating, and understanding that's a personal viewpoint and that's not on behalf of the industry. I'm curious, like, do you feel that those tough questions are being asked when people come to you with innovation saying, this is what we want to do? Do you see them asking those tough questions?
That's a great question. I think if they aren't, it's because they may not know the questions are there to ask. When I've seen the evolution of just our FinHub back in 2018, we would have, people coming in with great ideas, but they weren't really well thought out. They were just coming in with kind of the kernel of an idea. And, we would point out various things, concerns we had about investor protection or market integrity. And you could see the light bulb going off saying, oh, we hadn't thought of that. That wasn't our intention, but we understand why that's important. And I think over the years, you've seen the level of sophistication really grow of people in the industry starting to understand what are the regulators' concerns and why do they have them? And why is it important to me as a citizen, or me as, an innovator, or if I'm actually trying to create a product that I want to have some longevity, and I want it to have, staying power, and people will use it because it is compliant, because it is safe, and because the regulators have, looked at it. And, those are the kinds of projects that I think will have the longevity. And in the end, those are the entrepreneurs and developers that will succeed in the US market. So, we saw this evolution where people, I think, started to understand what the regulators wanted. And it was because they were reading about what we were saying, or they were coming in and talking to us, or talking to FinCEN or the CFTC, and the different innovation hubs, and their level of understanding, exponentially rose. People understand what the Howey test is. I remember, folks in law school, for a long time, people just had forgotten what that meant. But now you can talk to an engineer in blockchain space and they can spout off the prongs of the Howey test, or they can tell you the intricacies of the custody of the customer protection rule. It's really great. I mean, these people are super smart. Obviously, they're coding, they're coming up with these brilliant, never heard of before designs. They can understand, basic concepts around investor protection and the like. And so it's really kind of neat to see them, not only understanding it, but then wanting to integrate the spirit behind those rules into their designs. And I think that's where you're going to have the most, the success stories.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because it is refreshing. I think that has to do with very enforcement actions, right? I think the more, I know this sounds weird, but enforcement actions guide, inform, and people are like, oh, you're out there, you're looking, you're paying attention. But conversely, I think that, going back to the responsible innovation, offering folks the opportunity to say, with these FinHub, CFTC lab, these innovation labs, to say like, no, there are people at these agencies with subject matter expertise who are going to be able to talk with you, who are going to be able to geek out, who are going to be able to get to that level and understand what you're talking about. So come talk to us and engage us. I think that's a huge thing. I know they're like in the last 2 years, but I think it's really going to make a huge difference in the industry. And now you see all these new things. I saw the other day, there was the tokenization of litigation offerings. And then you're seeing like the tokenization of real estate investment funds. And you see tokenization put out there a lot. And I'm curious, because I get this question a lot. I'm assuming there's a difference between tokenization and securitization, or are these like ICOs where the SEC would regulate all of these?
Yeah, no, there is it's funny that you mentioned about the litigation. There's actually a word for that. I looked it up. It's called champerty, when someone provides backing for litigation and then they want to kind of share in the litigation victory.
Spoils.
Yeah,
the spoils of litigation.
Yeah, and that actually, believe it or not, can be a security. But it's an important question. Tokenization is just really digitization of an asset. It's just representing a certain asset or a bundle of rights or ownership of something in a tokenized form, which just means, if you have the token, you're evidencing ownership of a certain asset or bundle of rights at a certain point in time. And so I don't think, just mere tokenization shouldn't change the character of the underlying asset. But when you securitize something, or I'll use another word, fractionalize it too, you could be changing the character of the underlying asset. So what I mean by that is, in securitization, that generally refers to the pooling of assets and then offering investors some interest in that asset pool, whereby they will profit from the revenue stream created by that, whether it's interest and principal payments or the like. And some of the assets that end up getting securitized would be mortgages or loans or debt obligations, those kinds of things, real estate that can be packaged together or pooled together and then managed, and then the income stream that's generated from putting those assets to work would go to investors in the interest in that securitized asset. So you're creating something there that is a security. You're putting assets into a pool that may not start off as securities, but you're creating something by securitizing it that is a security. So that's kind of one concept. And then I'd say fractionalization is another one we hear a lot in this space. That would be taking an asset, breaking it up into little pieces and having people own a piece of it. So owning a piece of art or owning, interests in a stack of gold bullion. And, I think those things can also be securities because, you may have someone managing that asset and creating a value stream off it. And so that's another concept. Funny, basically anything can be turned into, can be approached in this way. It reminds me of, you have athletes that were, they're future performance, including, salary, endorsements, brand income, that was sold in the form of a security. So you would have security sold for a particular athlete, and investors would get the income stream of that athlete for the life of their performance.
That's like taking fantasy football to a whole nother level.
Yeah,
a whole nother level.
I mean, you had the Bowie bonds too, and this was when David Bowie, his, I guess, royalty streams from his album sales were basically turned into security. So, you can have a lot of creative instruments being formed. The point being, I think, bringing it back to the digital asset space, is one thing that makes digital assets so cool is that they are programmable assets. They're assets that, they just represent the representation on the blockchain is really just who owns it at a certain point in time, who has the exclusive right to transfer that asset. And what that digital asset represents has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis and almost at a point in time, because we've seen that assets can change kind of character depending on the life cycle of a project. So I think that complicates it too. But the exciting thing is you can have an asset that's programmable. So it can be programmed to change character. It can be programmed to take in different inputs from, for example, an Oracle or some other feature, in the smart contract or blockchain, in order to control the character of that asset, even though you haven't changed the ownership. So, these are new things. These are new and cool things. They present challenges for people who want to be in compliance, as well as to regulators. But working together, I think we can at least identify what the issues are, what the challenges are, and how we together can overcome them.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we saw at DOJ, and tell me if you see this as well, was kind of an emphasis on form over function, right? Like we'd see a lot of businesses who were just basically they were just unregistered money services businesses say, well, no, I'm an investor. I'm just buying it and then I'm selling it. And it was like, well, you're buying and selling it immediately, constantly, over and over, for the public. So you can't just say that you're not an MSB and that be the case. Is that something that you guys see as kind of people taking kind of like the wrong emphasis in terms of tokenization versus securitization?
Well, what we see in the terms of the first part of your question really dealt with, form over substance. That's exactly opposite of the way the securities laws work. We're substance over form. So I think it was tough for a lot of people, especially if you're coming from, an engineering background and you're used to, programming something. You're looking at things in a binary sense. It's either on or off. It's either, this or that. If a regulator tells me it doesn't comply with this, then I'm just going to tweak this one thing, and now it's different, And I think oftentimes that works, but sometimes it doesn't, because you really have to look at the economic reality of what's going on, all the facts and circumstances, and if it kind of fits the test, which is a very broad-based test. It's meant to capture all, the many different kinds of novel schemes and devices that really embody a security, regardless of the technology, regardless of the changes and evolution of something. These types of laws are meant to capture those things, so you don't have to rewrite them every time somebody tweaks something or comes up with a different design. It's technology neutral. So, for a lot of people, I think it's difficult to get your head around the concept of substance over form. But that's the way, many of the laws here in the US work. And then the second part of your question really, I'm sorry, could you repeat the second part?
Oh, no, it was the first part. Just I had limited it, but your answer, actually, it shouldn't be limited to tokenization versus securitization. It applies to everything. So I think your first part of the question actually answered the second, that don't limit yourself, just always be thinking substance over form, and that's the better practice. So I think that's good. I do want to make sure that we have enough time for some of the audience questions. And I know a few of them have been coming in. Some folks put them in the chat. Some folks put them in the Q&A. So let me just make sure there's one in the chat. Did your SEC team work with and incorporate concerns from state securities regulators in your decision regarding the broker-dealer temporary custody of cryptocurrencies?
Well, I can't comment particularly on any specific deliberations that have to do with commission statements that come out, but I just will say in general that we do have a really great relationship with the states. NASA is the group of state securities regulators that we deal with and have dealt with and frequently collaborate with in this area. We do have bilateral communications with various states as they are checking in with us, and state banking regulators as well, because there is some overlap. I will say, we are very cognizant of what's going on in the states because, there are entities that there's some overlap. In other words, if there's entity that is acting as, for example, a custodian for assets, we are paying attention to what's going on, at the state level. But generally speaking, the federal securities laws, as long as we have the jurisdictional hook, the federal securities laws are gonna apply and could apply in addition to state securities laws. So, a state could take a different view of their own securities laws or, how they may look at certain things, but really, the SEC has the mandate to apply the federal securities law. So if there is, the use of interstate commerce or the mails or national securities exchange, those are the kinds of things that give us kind of jurisdiction over activity across the United States.
So one of the questions that came in, will there be any rulemaking proposals arising from the new division? I think they mean FinHub.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, no, part of our job is to advise the commissioners, the chairman, and work with the various divisions as we go through thinking about potential rulemaking. So, I couldn't comment whether or not there's any specific thing on the horizon. I will say that we have published on the FinHub website a couple requests for comments, and one of them has to do with considerations of rulemaking around the custody rules. So, if people, we are really interested to hear what people have to say or what they think about, rules as we consider changes to them. So in this space, I would encourage people to go to the sec.gov/FinHub site. We have a special area for requests for public input, and you can just click down and see what the pending requests for public input are, and feel free to send us your input. If you'd like it to remain private, you can ask for private treatment, but generally speaking, we publish all the public input that comes along so that people can see concerns that are being raised to the staff.
So the next question kind of touches on the responsible innovation, but flips the script a little bit. What checks are in place to make sure the investor protection guidance that your office is providing isn't too conservative as to stifle innovation in the space?
I think people aren't shy to tell us that they think things are too conservative. So we do get a lot of feedback.
Other than hate mail.
I do. I read a lot of commentary and in the press and by the public about activity that we undertake. I really try to take it to heart and understand where people are coming from. People don't always see all the aspects of the law that we have to be cognizant of, as well as kind of the broader impact across the U.S. regulatory and policymaking space. But anytime we do things, well, first of all, we try to solicit input before we do things, and we really listen to people. But even after an action goes out, I know me and my colleagues are very curious to see what the response is, what people are thinking, and to try to remain open-minded and flexible if we've missed the mark in some way.
Okay, let me turn to the next one. From ICO to DeFi, DeFi looks like an unregulated mess and more dangerous than ICOs as its ongoing participation in, quote, an alternate banking world, not just a one-off ripoff. How can you regulate it?
Yeah, and we talked a little bit earlier about that's one of my priorities as we go forward this year, is to really get our hands around the DeFi space, to try to do some outreach and encouraging people to come in and talk to us about what's going on there, and to encourage people to self-regulate a little bit in terms of we know what can happen when things go awry. We've seen the fraud in certain spaces. I think a lot of the people in this space are experimenting. They don't necessarily want to harm investors, but these are untested, in a lot of senses, untested smart contracts, untested code. So work with each other to test them and try to prevent things like the vampire fork or the attack on the Oracle. We've seen a lot of things happening that it sounds like science fiction, but it is happening. And people who are in this field understand what those things are. But if retail investors get in, they're not gonna. They may not necessarily know that these codes, some of the codes have not been tested or have vulnerabilities, or that there are potentials for unintended consequences. So I would just encourage people to try to innovate responsibly.
So the next question is interesting. The proposed custody practices makes broker-dealers the gatekeepers to guard against non-compliant securities offerings. Is this reasonable given the difficulty that the ICO crowd had understanding them, often with batteries of lawyers, and the regulators' ad hoc pronouncements, enforcements, etc., and Pierce's view versus Clayton? There's a lot there. Let's unpack that.
Yeah, I think you can look at the custody statement, the specific language, but it does contain, you need to have kind of policies and procedures around determining whether what you're doing is actual securities related activity. The statement itself allows the panoply of broker-dealer activity with respect to digital asset securities, but it's setting it up in kind of this special purpose broker-dealer, and it's putting some of the protections in place, limiting, some other activities, including, there's a limited provision for non-digital asset securities activity or traditional activity, and there's also, other strictures in there about the activities that a broker-dealer can do. I think, the idea is a broker-dealer should really just be in securities, should be handling securities. So there should be policies and procedures at the firm to make sure that that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I think just to piggyback on that, one of the things that's a little frustrating sometimes is when people ask, is it fair to expect people to understand this technology at a certain level? And I'm like, is it fair to expect people who are moving massive amounts of money? Yes, right. There's a certain responsibility in this space that I feel like it's strange to me that if you were to say, should somebody be able to move $1 billion in cash without understanding how cash worked, we would think that is crazy. But here, because we want to make the technology seem, and it is, don't get me wrong, it's complex. But if you're going to get involved and you're going to move all that money, I don't think it's unreasonable to say you have an obligation to understand what it is and how it is you're doing it, right? I mean, that's something that I feel like sometimes the pushback on that, again, it goes back to that concept of responsible innovation. Yes, if you're doing something, you should understand how it works, because otherwise, how can you understand the risks? But
that's exactly right. Like the point I made before is that, the whole financial services industry, which involves taking other people's assets and, holding them or investing them or managing them or trading them. The point is they're other people's assets. So it's highly regulated. There's a lot of protections around there to prevent risk of loss and theft and that kind of thing. And so if you want to set up a business wrapped around the provision of those types of services, it's, same activity, same risk, same regulation. It's really subject to those. That would be like, inventing a car before you figure out how the brakes work. I mean, you have to kind of consider, the risks. And
No, I think that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what are the real challenges, research issues needing innovative solutions and collaboration among friendly countries in this space?
I think there's going to be, there was an awful lot of collaboration in the past year or so around looking at, stable coins or the provision of, or the potential of a global stable coin, so-called stable coin, which is meant to be used more widely in, payments or retail payments. So I think people do recognize that there are potential efficiencies to be gained by exploring new technologies around remittances and payment systems. Pretty much across the board, people recognize that there are efficiencies and potential benefits to that. So there has been a lot of work internationally looking at these things. The FSB had a stablecoin working group and put out a risk report late last year, setting forth 10 high-level principles, and that was really the effort of extremely great collaboration, multi-jurisdictionally and multi-sectorally around stablecoins, which I think present not only issues of monetary policy, financial stability, but also market concerns as well, investor protection and user protection. So that document itself, and it was also the result of collaboration and input from industry groups as we move through the process. So that's just one example. I think going forward, we're going to see work by the standard setting bodies internationally around those high-level recommendations, and whether additional guidance will come out will be a result of that kind of work. And I think there'll be work around shoring up our cooperation mechanisms internationally, because we have to ensure that we have the information we need as global infrastructures develop in the blockchain space.
Here's a good one. Does the SEC use blockchain technology themselves?
I can't comment about all.
Where is the secret bunker, Val? Where is the secret bunker? What are FinHub's thoughts on company investment strategies leveraging Bitcoin, such as MicroStrategy and other companies who have seen a boost in their stock due to that?
I'm not sure I understand the question, so I'll just kind of
let's see.
Does it have to do with kind of putting digital assets as part of a portfolio or part of a investment strategy?
I think that's right. I remember reading an article, something about MicroStrategy had put a ton of its cash reserves into Bitcoin as part of their investment strategy. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I can't comment on whether or not something's a good investment or not. That's not something, generally speaking, the SEC is not a merit-based regulator. And what I mean by that is we don't tell someone something's a good investment or a bad investment. We let the investor make that choice. But critical to making that choice is that they make a fully informed decision. And so one of the kind of touchstones of the securities laws is to make sure that there is full and fair and complete accurate disclosure around what an investment is and what its risks are and what it is and what it isn't. And so that's part of the reason, our disclosure regime exists, is to ensure that. It's not to tell you whether or not it's a good investment or a bad investment. Now, with certain types of instruments, there are a little bit more kind of stricture around what you can invest in. For example, a mutual fund or, an investment company. There are some, rules and regulations that apply to that. But generally speaking, we don't comment on whether or not something is a good investment.
Totally understand. I think we don't have time for any more questions, unfortunately. I know people could go all day. I've frequently enjoyed so many of my conversations with you. Val, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your time and insights. Folks who are on, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate all the fantastic questions that were submitted. We will have the recording sent out via email this week, and it will be on the Links virtual landing page where you can check it out along with other past sessions. There's also a lot of great material on our website just generally that I encourage you to check out. We'll be announcing additional sessions this week, so stay tuned for more sessions throughout the winter and spring. Thank you everyone who attended, and Val, thank you so much. As usual, you are awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank everyone who continues to engage with FinHub. It's really been a meaningful part of our process. So continue to do that. Happy 2021, everyone.
Thanks, Val. And thanks to everyone who attended. Have a great day.